Earlier this month, we attended the annual conference for the American Marketing Association St. Louis at Webster University. It was an amazingly well-run conference with some great speakers, and today I'm going to share some of the key takeaways from a presentation by Katie Martell of Rabble-Rouser, as well as my thoughts. So there's this playbook in the corporate world of grabbing a hold of social movements that are enjoying their moment in the sun and then trying to piggyback off of them to sell more products. We've all seen it, from products that are sold in pink variants to raise awareness of breast cancer research, to products that have civil rights icons on their labels to draw awareness of the historical struggles of women and people of color and immigrants and the LGBTQ plus community to be granted their deserved rights and privileges in society. And of course, we've seen the rainbow branding on every sort of product to show affinity for Pride Month. And there are also products that tout environmental values, which claim to benefit poorer communities in some way, or which donate some of their proceeds to designated charities. And it feels good, doesn't it, to consume things with all the convenience of a modern shopping experience, but still feel like you're making a difference somehow? But I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Most of these promotional campaigns aren't in good faith and often mask some pretty cynical behavior behind the scenes. And over the last decade, many people have gone from believing that perhaps corporations espousing values finally mean what they're saying to the more pragmatic view that perhaps corporations are just trying to catch a little bit of the energy from whichever way the winds are blowing. This was the topic our keynote speaker brought to close out our annual conference. Katie Martell is from Rabble-Rouser and gave a talk titled Woke Brands and Weary Consumers. And I want to be respectful of Katie because unlike all of her other presenters at this conference, she is a professional speaker and also an auctioneer. And thus her content is part of what you get when you hire her. So I'm going to stay fairly general and only briefly recap what she had to say and then provide some thoughts on it. But if you'd like to hear from Katie Martell directly, and I recommend that you do, check the show notes. I've linked one of her publicly accessible talks from Boston in 2024 where she covers some of the same content. And if you like what she has to say, I encourage you to hire her. I also want to mention we had a great MC the entire day named Keisha Mabry Haymore, who is also an excellent speaker and is likewise deserving of your consideration if you need a speaker or MC for your event. I've included details for both Katie and Keisha in the show notes. But let's dig into this keynote, which was definitely a thought-provoking way to end a marketing conference, and an important one too. I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this is the Marketing Gateway. Katie Martell opened her talk by being honest that she has seen her opinion change over the last decade from corporations taking a stand is good to corporations taking a stand is often problematic. Her thought process evolved as she looked into the 2010s trend of femvertising, which was not itself a new idea. As she pointed out in her talk, it harkens all the way back to cigarette advertising, where an attempt to attach a brand to women's rights activism resulted in the 1960s and 70s Virginia Slim slogan, "You've come a long way, baby," as the Philip Morris Company rebranded their cigarettes to make them appeal more to women. That campaign, by the way, is absolutely revolting to look at today, because so many of the ads are about how women were afraid to be seen smoking, and now they're boldly empowered to do so because they have an elegant, slim, filtered cigarette at their disposal. And Katie also reminded us that a couple of decades earlier, Marlboro, which was originally targeted towards women for pretty much the same reasons, went all in on rugged frontier imagery and left women behind. The history of tobacco advertising is fraught with stuff like this, and I'm glad we as a society have moved past it. But anyhow, Katie went on to talk about greenwashing, which is when corporations use claims of environmental friendliness to mask the horrible pollution they're responsible for. And she also brought up the fact that the reason we use the phrase carbon footprint today is because the energy company BP grabbed onto the idea and used it to shift blame for air pollution from industry and onto the consumers themselves. In other words, it's not us, it's you who's polluting. Greenwashing is often utilized in public campaigns to make large conglomerates look like they're part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And Katie didn't mention this, but it's also used to mask cuts to service in some industries. In the hospitality industry, for example, hotels can pay fewer custodial staff by making daily cleaning optional for guests staying 2 days or more, and can also reduce their laundering costs by washing towels and sheets less often and ditching prepackaged soaps and lotions for refillable dispensers. Are these cuts problematic? Not really, but they're almost always masked by a lofty commitment to the environment proudly printed on cards placed in each hotel room. Another common attachment over the last years has been the LGBTQ plus community, and we've really come full circle from corporations being afraid to touch this issue to many retailers and corporations putting rainbows on everything during the Biden administration, during what felt like a shift towards progressive values in America, to once again being afraid to celebrate the LGBTQ plus community once Donald Trump returned to office and more conservative politics became the rule of the day again. And look, I don't want to get any more political than we have to here because this show is about marketing, not politics. But if your corporate stance is to only lean in whichever way the political winds are blowing, you're standing for yourself, not for the causes you purport to support. To younger consumers in the millennial and Gen Z population, that's generally a big turnoff because they value authenticity over hollow words. But it's also a great way to court controversy because the moment you are even slightly forced to defend what you're leaning or why you're leaning in a certain direction, you tend to backpedal. And as Katie discussed, that's exactly what happened to Bud Light when they created a commemorative can featuring a trans TikTok influencer named Dylan Mulvaney as part of a social media campaign that was not intended to create any sort of controversy. Unfortunately, it did, and conservative media and personalities latched onto the campaign and used it to stir up a lot of anti-trans discussion. The right-leaning musician Kid Rock filmed himself using an MP5 submachine gun to shoot a case of Bud Light and then posted it on social media. Even worse, Bud Light refused to take a stand of any sort, issuing an empty statement claiming they were just trying to unite America, not divide it. A boycott ensued. Stock prices went down. Bud Light had to backpedal, losing credibility with everyone rather than appeasing anyone. Likewise, Katie mentioned Target, who went on from being a progressive Minnesota headquartered company that celebrated diversity, DEI, and the LGBTQ plus community, to one that erased its DEI program, stopped featuring Pride Month apparel in its stores, and then refused to cede any ground when a boycott led by the Black community took traction. Target has paid a huge price and lost customers and a tarnished brand as a result of it. Katie pointed out that the evidence that a company doesn't really stand for the values it espouses is in the makeup of the management. Very few corporations have enough women, people of color, or LGBTQ plus personnel in upper management anywhere near proportional to the population, and diversity tends to be a term that's more about celebrating the lowest paid employees on the front lines, not the more highly paid corporate management staff who are often male and often white. Likewise, she said, efforts to ensure Black-owned businesses own a proportionate share of retail space, that's 15% by the way, have often fallen flat. All of this, she concluded, gives us the illusion of progress, and the reality is that when these positions become unfavorable, you get situations like Walmart's line of Juneteenth products, which the retailer released in 2022, and then received enormous backlash from on all sides of the issue. One of the products that was particularly problematic was a Great Value branded ice cream flavor featuring red velvet and cheesecake flavors, but which is a copycat of an ice cream flavor by a Black-owned business called Creamalicious. Rather than taking the feedback that they ought to be partnering with this business directly or pledging proceeds to support Black-owned businesses in general, Walmart did what most companies do. It quickly pulled the product line, issued unsatisfying apologies, and stopped celebrating Juneteenth, which is exactly the wrong way to approach a new holiday celebrating the end of slavery in the United States, particularly when the company has a frontline workforce that's only 48% Caucasian, but so are 58% of the managers and 70% of the officers. African Americans, by contrast, make up 21% of the workforce for Walmart, but only 12% of management and 10% of officers. And this is despite some very public attempts to improve on DEI in their corporation. I enjoyed Katie's talk quite a bit because I'm the sort of person who likes to make my outer persona match my inner intentions. And I think it's important that we call out corporations to take advantage of many consumers' desire to see a more equal, equitable, and environmentally sustainable business community, but then turn out to just be using those ideals as a veneer for bad behavior. At the same time, it's good that we support some of the companies who are doing legitimate good in the world. And we have to be careful because a lot of the lists that you'll find on the internet of these so-called socially responsible companies are actually companies who are doing exactly the sorts of things that Katie called out in her talk. Some of these, featured in a Newsweek list of America's most responsible companies, or others that I've linked in the show notes, are notorious for treating employees, suppliers, customers, and their own communities terribly. Many also sponsor harmful legislation in favor of removing environmental protections. The methodology for all of these lists is flawed because it's easy to make it look like you're doing good in the world through corporate donations and CSR initiatives. My rule of thumb is support small businesses whenever possible, support big box retailers who treat their employees well, and support public benefit organizations and not-for-profits who are doing provable good in the world and who stand by their values even when it's inconvenient. Our sincere thanks to Katie Martell for being willing to speak up so boldly and passionately about what happens when brands pretend to stand for something but are potentially or actually doing more harm than good. And as a reminder to all of our friends in the marketing community, it is always better to stand for something you truly care about than to make people feel like you've tricked them into feeling an affinity for your brand. So if you want to support a public cause and don't want to court controversy, pick something that everybody cares about, like making sure kids have school supplies, or that communities have clean water, or that food banks have donations flowing in, or that military veterans have a support structure to help them transition back into the civilian world when they leave the service. These are all worthwhile causes that you can be 100% committed to and which definitely matter. So next week, we're going to be at the Midwest Digital Marketing Conference for part of the week, asking attendees to give us some fresh perspectives on what's happening in the world of marketing. And we're, of course, going to have some great marketing mentors back on the show very soon. It's been a lot of fun to be able to keep bridging the gaps between our local marketers and the community. And as always, if you're interested in being a guest, just let us know at themarketinggateway.com. I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this has been The Marketing Gateway. We'll see you next time. This month, it's National Donate Life Month, and so I want to encourage you to consider registering to be an organ donor. Did you know that one organ donor can not only save up to 8 lives, but can also donate corneas that can help people with their vision, and tissue that can be made into hundreds of incredibly beneficial medical products? Your gift of life can go really far in benefiting others, potentially 75 lives or more. And you might be surprised who can be a donor and what can be donated. Even people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s can be donors today. When you register to be a donor, all you're doing is saying, if I die, I want my organs and tissues to go to the people who need them. You can be confident that the doctors and nurses who are taking care of you will do everything they can to keep you alive, and it's up to them, not the people recovering the organs, to decide when you've reached a point where you cannot come back. Every now and then there's a sensational news story about a situation where the hospital got it wrong, but those cases are rare. And that's why there are so many precautions in place to ensure that donation is administered with safety, respect, transparency, and a high degree of ethical behavior. Donors are heroes and they're treated with dignity. And there's an important reason why you need to consider this. There are over 100,000 people on the National Transplant Registry right now who will die if they don't receive an organ. Many of them need a kidney transplant and have to go and do dialysis treatments daily just to stay alive. Dialysis is time-consuming and not a lot of fun, and those individuals have trouble leading healthy, happy, productive lives because they're really, really sick. 13 people die every day waiting for an organ transplant. So imagine there's a mom out there who needs a second chance to take care of her kids, or a new grandfather who wants to see his grandkids grow up, or a child who wants to have a chance at leading a full life, or a newlywed who hasn't had a chance to settle down and start a family yet. All of these sorts of people, and more just like them, are on the waiting list now, and they need your help. I personally know many of the hardworking professionals who get those donated gifts to the people in need, and let me tell you, I'm always amazed by their passion, their professionalism, and their dedication to caring for donors and their families. So please visit donatelife.net and click on Register to be a Donor. If you're willing to read up on the resources to learn more, feel free. And if you're not ready to register but still want to be a donor, please tell your family and friends so that if they have to make the decision for you, they will know your wishes. And you won't be alone. 90% of Americans support organ donation.